What if that exhaustion you proudly call being a responsible adult is actually just a really sophisticated survival mechanism?
Oh, yeah, like a way of hiding your deepest fears from yourself.
Exactly. Or, what if the peace you think you found by just totally disconnecting from other people isn't peace at all, but just a very quiet form of surrender?
I mean, it's a bold premise to start with, but it really cuts right to the core of how we operate. We build these massive, elaborate architectures to protect
Right.
ourselves.
To protect ourselves from being seen, even by our own minds.
Yes, and when something threatens to illuminate those structures, our default reaction is almost always to just panic.
Which is exactly why we are unpacking this today. Welcome to a deep dive into a space for spiritual growth, reflection, and purposeful living.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, today we are analyzing a really fascinating reflection written by Reverend Felecia O'Neal. It's titled, Light as Divine Consciousness, The Life That Awakens Us.
Such a powerful piece of writing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And in this deep dive, our mission is to examine the psychological and, theological frameworks hidden inside the opening verses of the Gospel of John, specifically John chapter 1, verses 1 to 5.
Right, because we are exploring a very specific concept of light here.
Yeah, we aren't talking about physical photons like the light bulb that helps you see your living room. We are looking at a conceptual framework of light, the kind of light that awakens you to God, to truth, to profound internal healing.
And ultimately to the process of becoming whole, integrating the fragmented parts of yourself.
Right. But before we even touch the ancient scripture, Reverend Neal grounds her reflection in this universal human experience.
Yeah, the experience of just waking up.
Exactly. And most of you listening have probably experienced this at least once. You might not have a religious vocabulary for it, but there is this distinct, undeniable moment when you suddenly realize you are seeing your own life differently.
It's that quiet moment. Sometimes it almost
Yeah.
feels intrusive, right? That moment of clarity.
Yeah. Maybe it happens on a completely mundane Tuesday commute, something you've managed to keep hidden from yourself, a toxic habit, or maybe a career path you actually hate.
Or a relationship dynamic that is just draining you.
Yes, it suddenly becomes crystal clear,
Mm.
and you can't unsee it. You feel something inside. You begin to recognize a truth a truth you didn't even know you were actively avoiding.
And Reverend Neal frames that exact phenomenon as one of the primary functions of divine light. I mean, in her analysis, this kind of illumination doesn't primarily exist to help you see the external world.
Right.
It exists to force you to understand what is functioning within you. It reveals the internal topography, so to
The
speak.
internal topography, I like.
Yeah, it highlights the places inside the human psyche that have been waiting in the dark for resolution or, for transformation.
And this brings us right to the text Reverend O'Neal uses to anchor this whole idea, the opening of the Gospel of John.
Right, which is quite different from the other Gospels.
Totally different. If you grew up around the Christian tradition, you know that Matthew and Luke, they start with the classic historical scenes, the manger, the shepherds, the long genealogies, tracking who begot whom.
Yeah, John just completely ignores all of that.
He does. He skips the historical biography of a first-century teacher and reaches all the way back into the deep mystery of creation, the divine source. He writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God."
Now, we have to stop right there and look at the actual language being used because it completely changes how we understand the rest of the text.
How so?
Well, the English translation says the word, but the original Greek text actually uses the term logos.
Ah, logos.
Yeah, and to a first century audience, whether we're talking about Greek philosophers or Jewish theologians, logos was a massive, loaded concept.
It wasn't just a spoken syllable.
No, not at all. In Greek thought, logos was the divine animating principle of the universe. It was the underlying logic, the rational order that literally kept the cosmos from collapsing into chaos. And in Jewish thought, it was the active, creative, spoken breath of God that brought reality into existence.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Mm-hmm.
Because quoting an ancient term like logos and just moving on leaves a massive gap in how we actually understand this light.
Definitely.
If I'm hearing you right, reading John's opening isn't like reading a historical diary. It's like taking a microscope that you've been using to look at, the leaves in your backyard.
And suddenly swapping it for a space telescope.
Yes,
Yeah.
swapping it for the James Webb Space Telescope to look at the edge of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
John is talking about the cosmic architecture of life itself. We are looking at the source code of reality.
The source code is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. John is basically saying that the ultimate logic of the universe isn't just a cold mathematical equation. It is a creative, expressive force.
And then he makes his pivotal move, right?
He does. He writes, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it."
So it's very active.
What's fascinating here is that in John's theological framework, this light is highly active. It is the life force of this logos. It is not a passive glow from a lamppost waiting for someone to walk by.
Right. It moves. It seeks.
Exactly. It enters, it reveals, and it aggressively and persistently refuses to be swallowed by the dark.
But, okay, if this light is so active and functions as the very logic of the cosmos, how does that actually translate to the messy, everyday internal lives of the people listening to us right now?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah, because Reverend O'Neal makes this pivot in her writing, moving our focus from the grand cosmos down to the individual psyche. But I have to push back here gently.
Go for it.
When we talk about things like spiritual consciousness or divine awareness, it can sound incredibly abstract, almost like floating on a cloud.
Right, burning incense and detaching from reality.
Exactly. But she describes it as a truth that keeps rising inside us. So is spiritual growth just about finding a peaceful, warm feeling, or is it about being lovingly confronted?
It is absolutely the latter, and Reverend O'Neal's reflection tackles that abstraction directly by pointing back to the specific words John inextricably links together: life and light.
Life and light.
Yes, illumination in this framework isn't just about feeling peaceful or, achieving some detached intellectual enlightenment. It is an active invitation into a deeper life.
And mechanically speaking, to step into a deeper life, you have to be confronted with the areas where you are currently fragmented.
You have to look at the areas where you are divided.
Right, where life is actually being drained from you.
Precisely. The light acts as a diagnostic tool. It helps you notice what gives you vitality and what is slowly suffocating you.
It shines a light on the hidden stuff.
Yeah, it forces consciousness onto the old stories, the hidden psychological wounds, the defense mechanisms, and, the heavy familial expectations that dictate how you move through the world.
So it is spiritual consciousness, but it demands honesty.
Rigorous, often uncomfortable honesty about where your internal foundation is cracked.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If the brain is working that hard to protect us with shadows, what happens when this light actually forces its way in? If this light is offering us a deeper, truer life, why do we spend so much of our lives hiding in the shadows?
It is the ultimate psychological puzzle, and what is so striking about Reverend O'Neal's writing here is her compassion.
Yes, she is very compassionate about this.
She proposes that we don't hide these fractured parts of ourselves because we are bad or inherently malevolent or because we are faithless failures. We hide because we are human.
We learn to survive.
Exactly. It's the basic human drive for survival. Think about the mechanics of it. From a very young age, we learn to protect our tender spots from a harsh world.
We learn to perform, to secure approval.
And we learn to suppress parts of our identity that are deemed unacceptable by our peers or communities. We just keep moving.
Right. The ego builds these thick walls to keep the self safe. The problem is, over decades, those walls create massive, unexamined shadows in our internal lives.
And this is where the text's analysis gets really useful. Reverend O'Neal points out how we take our deepest insecurities and we basically rebrand them.
Yes. The semantic gymnastics we do to justify living in the dark. Let's look at the actual mechanisms here, because I think a lot of listeners will relate to this. We learn to take our sheer bone-deep exhaustion.
And call it responsibility.
Yes. We dress up the exhaustion that comes from living a life entirely dictated by other people's expectations, and we proudly call it being a responsible adult.
Which is a brilliant defense mechanism, really, because if you label your burnout as responsibility, society applauds you. No one tells you to stop.
No one questions it. Or we take our paralyzing fear of failure or rejection, and we rebrand it as wisdom. We're being practical.
Right. We don't take the risk not because we are wise, but because we are terrified.
And we take our deep emotional disconnection from others, the walls we put up so we don't get hurt again, and we convince ourselves it's just us protecting our peace.
The underlying psychology here is cognitive dissonance. The human mind simply cannot tolerate the severe discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs.
Right.
If your conscious belief is, I am a successful, happy adult, but your subconscious reality is, I am terrified and running on empty, your brain will literally bend reality to make those two things fit.
It rationalizes the exhaustion.
It justifies the isolation. We live for years with parts of our true selves hidden in shadow, running an operating system that was purely created by trauma and survival.
And then the system gets a forced update.
Exactly. The light comes in.
And according to this theological framework, the light lovingly tells the unvarnished truth. It shatters the cognitive dissonance. But we are so terrified of exposure, right?
Because of our cultural conditioning, we've been taught to associate being brought to light with a very specific negative outcome, judgment,
When we think of something being exposed, we think of scandals.
or being condemned, shamed, found severely lacking by some punitive authority figure.
It's the spotlight effect. Like,
Right.
our cultural reflex is to view divine light like a police helicopter spotlight catching us in the act of being imperfect.
Or a buzzing fluorescent bulb in an interrogation room.
Yes. Under an interrogation light, there is nowhere to hide. It creates these stark, ugly shadows. It makes you instinctively cross your arms, get defensive, and just close yourself off.
But Reverend O'Neal articulates a radical paradigm shift here regarding the nature of this specific divine light. In this framework, the light of Christ doesn't expose you to shame you.
It reveals you so you can be healed.
Exactly. The intention behind the illumination changes everything. It is not harsh, it is holy, it is not cruel, it is clarifying.
It doesn't arrive to violently dismantle what is tender and fragile in your psyche.
No, it arrives to gently awaken what is true and durable.
That is a phenomenal distinction.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the difference between that interrogation room bulb and the morning sun warming your face through a kitchen window.
That's a great analogy.
Because both sources of light allow you to see the room with perfect clarity. Both reveal the dust on the table. But only one of those lights actually invites you to uncross your arms, take a deep breath, and stay.
The morning sun doesn't make you feel accused, it just makes you feel seen.
And that framework of feeling seen rather than accused is so vital for understanding how we process our own pain. Which brings us back to the text. John writes, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it."
Right.
So what does this all mean? This raises a major question about the realism of this theology.
It does.
Because if we are being realistic, our darkness, our pain, our confusion,
Our deep-seated anxieties.
they don't just magically vanish overnight because we had a moment of spiritual clarity.
Yeah.
So how does this text handle the actual lived experience of suffering? Does this mean we just wake up one day, the shadows are gone, and we are completely healed?
The text emphatically rejects that kind of magical thinking. When John says the darkness has not overcome the light, he is fundamentally acknowledging that the darkness exists.
Really?
Very real. Your confusion is real. The pain from your past is real. The shadows created by your survival mechanisms are stubborn, and they are persistent.
So the text doesn't ask you to pretend they aren't there.
Not at all. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it asserts that those dark elements are not ultimate. They do not have the final say. And most importantly, they are not the core of your identity.
In other words, you don't have to wait until you are perfectly polished to engage with this light.
Exactly.
So many belief systems operate on this, like prerequisite model. Clean yourself up, get your theology perfectly lined up, conquer your doubts, and then God will interact with you.
But this suggests the exact opposite. Reverend O'Neal proposes that the light meets you exactly where you are, right in the middle of your mess and your uncertainty.
You do not achieve wholeness by avoiding what needs light.
Right. Or by violently amputating the parts of your psyche that are struggling. You don't grow spiritually by putting on a brave face or pretending you don't have deep wounds or inconvenient doubts.
You can't deepen your spiritual life by only bringing God your polished resume.
That is precisely the trap most people fall into. But this framework insists that the light invites all of it. It welcomes the healed parts of you and the still tender parts.
Deeply faithful parts and the incredibly questioning parts.
Yes, the areas of your life that are mostly functional and the tender spots you can barely stand to look at yourself.
I really appreciate how Reverend O'Neal ensures this concept remains accessible. She points out that this light isn't an exclusive VIP club for the already certain.
Or for the deeply religious who have never wrestled with their faith for a single day.
Right. It is explicitly for the seeker. It is for the wounded. It's for the skeptic who is questioning everything. It is designed to meet you exactly as you are right now, in whatever season of becoming you find yourself.
Which naturally leads us to the practical application of all this. Because if this light is so accommodating, and if the goal is healing rather than shame, how does a person actually engage with it?
Right. How do we do this daily?
Well, as Reverend O'Neal notes, you cannot force this kind of internal transformation. You cannot muscle your way into spiritual growth through sheer willpower.
I mean, you can't just put achieve spiritual awakening on your to-do list, right, between buying groceries and paying the electric bill.
You really can't. The harder you try to force an awakening, the more you end up just reinforcing your ego's control over the situation.
So what's the alternative?
The practice Reverend O'Neal suggests is much more subtle. The invitation is simply to make room. We make room for the light to do its work through the quiet, intentional practices of our daily lives.
Like what?
Through prayer, through reflection, through actual physical rest, giving your nervous system a chance to power down.
And through honest self-examination.
Yes, rigorous, but gentle.
It's about creating a little bit of negative space in the incredibly crowded, noisy room of your life so that a sacred awareness actually has room to slip in.
Beautifully said.
And Reverend O'Neal provides some highly practical reflection questions in her work to help facilitate exactly that. I want to offer these directly to you, the listener. You don't have to answer them right now, but maybe let them rattle around in your mind today. Ask yourself, what is being revealed to me right now?
What specific truth or pattern is coming into your awareness that you have perhaps spent years actively avoiding?
Where do you sense light entering your life, even in a micro moment, right in this current season?
What new possibility are you being invited to see more clearly if you are willing to let go of your old survival mechanisms?
And perhaps the most revealing question, are there places within yourself that you have kept hidden? Not because they are inherently bad, but purely because you feared the judgment of others, or because you feared the hard, uncomfortable work of actual change.
This raises an important question. These reflections disrupt the cognitive dissonance we talked about earlier. How might your entire trajectory shift? How might your physical posture relax? How might your relationships change if you truly trusted that this divine illumination comes not to expose your flaws, but to awaken your potential?
Wow. Just imagine the sheer relief of living from that kind of trust. Imagine waking up and not immediately strapping on the heavy, exhausting armor of performance and survival.
It would change everything.
It really would. Imagine allowing the light to reveal what needs to be seen, trusting it to soften what the harshness of the world has hardened in you, and letting it guide you toward the authentic life that has been quietly waiting for you all along.
Because that is the ultimate promise embedded in John's opening verses. The Logos, this divine light, doesn't just act as a static map pointing out the potholes in the road. It is an active participant that helps you become the integrated whole person you are always meant to be.
It's a profound reframing of how we view our own spiritual and psychological development. We spend massive amounts of energy trying to manufacture the perfect life.
We try to generate our own light through sheer achievement.
But if the ultimate purpose of this divine consciousness is simply to awaken us to the reality that is already present, then perhaps our greatest spiritual task isn't building a flawless life from scratch.
Right. Our task isn't to fix the darkness all by ourselves.
Exactly. Our greatest spiritual task is simply to stop closing our eyes to the light that is already shining.
That's a phenomenal concept to leave you with.
Thank you so much for listening to this deep dive into a space for spiritual growth, reflection, and purposeful living. To learn more about Reverend Felecia O'Neal, explore spiritual coaching resources, or follow upcoming Bible study updates, visit refeliciaoneal.com.
And if this reflection spoke to you, definitely consider subscribing to Reverend Felecia O'Neal's Substack for more reflections on spiritual growth, purpose, and intentional living.
As you transition back into the rhythm of your day, think about those survival mechanisms we discussed, the exhaustion you call responsibility, the fear you call wisdom. You don't have to dismantle them all today. Just be willing to see them in the light. Until next time. Until next time.